The supplies you're going to need for your Carten hat is a super bulky weight yarn. When you are checking the labels, you want to look here for the little description box. That is a size 6 super bulky weight. I am using the Bernat Softy Chunky Twist in the tan color, and this hat takes 91 yards. The needles I am using are a set of circular needles. They're 16 inches. The needles are 10.5 or US 10.5, so 6.5 millimeters. At the end, I also will be switching my needles over to some DPNs. Now, I'm just going to use them really as stitch holders. I'm not going to knit off of them. So if you don't have a size 10.5 DPNs, don't go out and buy them. Use a size 10 or an 11 if you have them. Just something close, because like I said, you're not actually making stitches with them. They're just going to be a holder. So use whatever you have that's close in size. Always you'll need a pair of scissors, your tapestry needle, and for this hat I used 4 stitch markers. To make the Carten Beanie, we begin with the brim and work towards the crown. So that means that our cast on edge needs to be very stretchy. You can see that this one here has a lot of stretch to it. The method of cast on that I chose to do is the German twist cast on. I'll show you closely what that looks like. It has a bit of a purl bump look to it, but because this is in ribbing, I don't think it affects the look of the hat at all, and I really like the amount of stretch in this method, so that is what I chose to do, and I will show you how to make a German twist cast on. I'm switching to a thinner yarn for the tutorial of how to do this cast on because there's a lot of movement with the needle, and I want it to be very clear as to where the needle is going in and out of. So in using a thinner yarn, the camera picks up all of that motion a little better. The German twist cast on is a typical long tail cast on. It's very stretchy, but in being a long tail cast on, that means that you do have to set aside that long tail in preparation for all of your cast on stitches, which brings the question of how long do I make this tail? So I've got a little trick to show you. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. The first thing you want to do is to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. I leave myself about 12 inches. Then you need to refer to your pattern to see how many cast on stitches you will need. So for this, we're going to say 10. So after my length of yarn that I'm leaving, for just in case, then I'm going to put my needle on my yarn, making sure I'm using the working yarn. I'm going to wrap around 10 times. So that was the number of cast on stitches. And so this is approximately the amount of yarn that each cast on stitch is going to need. So you'll just keep your fingers tight where that ended and add your slip knot on the other side of that. Now, like I said, this isn't exactly perfect. I always leave myself that little bit of wiggle room, but as long as you don't wrap the yarn too tightly, it's usually fairly accurate. So there's a lot of movement when working the German twist cast on, so I will work it very slowly the first few times so you can get the hang of it. But know that once you have the motion down, it becomes very fast and a very smooth cast on. So here we go. The first thing you want to do is to get your slip stitch on your needle, and I always put my thumb over that stitch to keep it from sliding around. So I'll put my thumb here and hold that steady. Now you want to take both tails coming off of your needle and grab them in your hand. You're going to use these 3 fingers back here in your palm and hold them fairly securely. And you are going to use your forefinger and your thumb, and you are going to split those 2 yarns. So we will split those yarns and make this little triangle. So that is the first step. So again, hold those yarns using your finger and your thumb, split it open, and make this triangle. The next thing you need to do will be to flip this hand over so your palm is facing up. When you do that, take your needle and pull it over the top of your thumb. You can see you now have a loop over your thumb and one over your forefinger with this strand right here on top over your palm. Now here comes all the motion for your needle. The first thing we do is to take the tip of our needle and go up under both strands at your thumb. From here, you will put the needle in through that triangle and come out the outer side. So from here, you will sweep the needle, and I turn my yarn hand at the same time just to make it a little smoother, a little quicker. So you will sweep your needle across and pick up that strand right there on your finger. You will sweep back across both yarns of your thumb, go under the yarn on the outside and over the yarn on the inside, and then out. Here you will slip your thumb out of that loop, and you can see you have casted on a new stitch. Now once you learn the motion of working these stitches, there is a way to speed up the process, and I'll show you that in just a second. So again, we will grab both tails, hold them secure, split the yarn with your finger and your thumb, making that triangle. Turn it over, pull your needle down. Take the tip of your needle, go under both yarns, through the triangle at your thumb, and out the outer side. Sweep the needle over the palm, grab that strand at your finger, sweep back across. Go under the outer yarn, over the inside yarn, and out. Let go with your thumb. And then from here, what you will do is to use your thumb to tighten that stitch. And that puts you back into position to work your next cast on. So, under, in, sweep across and grab, sweep back across, under, over, out. Tighten it up, and now we have 4 cast on stitches. So again, pull it down, under, in, across, grab, sweep back across, under, over, out, and drop your thumb loop, tightening that up. It might take a few stitches to get the hang of that movement and that motion, but again, it will speed up and it will be very smooth and very quick, and it produces a nice and stretchy cast on edge for any time you're going to make a hat or socks or the bottom ribbing of a sweater or cuffs. Anytime you are needing a lot of stretch in your cast on, the German twist cast on is a really great method. So now that you have the hang of the German twisted cast on, press pause, and when you have 60 stitches on your needle, come back and I will show you how to join for knitting in the round, and we'll make that ribbing. To begin making the ribbing, we are going to need to join our stitches for working in the round. So the first thing that you do before joining is to make sure that all of our stitches are oriented in the same way. What I mean by that is we need to make sure that all of the loops on the needles are on the outside, where the cast on edge is all towards the inside. So you need to make sure that none of your stitches are twisted. Okay, so now that we have all of our stitches oriented the same way, they are all going the same direction, the next thing that we have to do to join the stitches is actually to cast on one more stitch. So because the pattern calls for 60 stitches, that's what I have on my needle. We are going to use a method called the invisible joining method, which means casting on one more stitch. So I'm going to do that really quickly. Have one more stitch, so now we have 61 stitches. So don't worry about that, we will be casting it off. It is only used for joining. So we will need to slip this last stitch over to the other needle. And you will do that knitwise. So we will slip that stitch. Now what we will do is to pass over the extra stitch that we cast on. You will pass it over the stitch that you just slipped. So we will grab that and pass it over. Now you will take this stitch, place it back on the other needle, and we are joined in the round, and it will be invisible whenever we begin stitching. Right now it's a little loose, but if you take that tail, you can pull that and tighten it up. And as you're working on your project, as it begins to grow, this join will disappear, it will become invisible. So now what you need to do is to create the ribbing for your hat, the brim. It is just a simple knit 2 purl 1 stitch pattern. You will work that until your brim is 2 inches. Now if you've never worked in the round before, what you're going to do is just to place a marker that will mark where one row ends and the next begins. You are essentially just going to spiral. So whenever you come to your marker, just slip it and continue to work your knit 2 purl 1 around. And again, work that ribbing until it is 2 inches. I'm going to go ahead and work a row of the ribbing for those of you that have never worked in the round before, so you can see what it looks like when you go from row 1 to row 2. So I'm going to place my marker to mark the beginning of each round. So press pause and come back after you've worked your round, and I will show you how to go from row 1 to row 2. I have completed one full row of the ribbing pattern, that knit 2 purl 1 all the way around. We have come to our marker. So all you will do to switch from row 1 to row 2 is just to slip that marker, and you will begin the next row, which is a repeat, then knit 2 purl 1, and you can see that the way you switch is to simply go from the last stitch of the first row to the first stitch of the next row. So what you will do is just to repeat this ribbing row until the ribbing for your hat reaches about 2 inches long. And then at that point, you will just switch from the ribbing pattern to the stitch pattern for the body of the hat. I've stitched up a bit of ribbing to show how to switch over from the ribbing into the stitch pattern for the body of the hat. It's only about 1 inch long, but I'm going to go ahead and switch over just for the sake of time. It's just as easy as going from row 1 to 2 in the ribbing pattern that we did a minute ago. You are going to want to transfer your beginning marker. Now the stitch pattern will switch from the knit 2 purl 1 that you've been doing for the ribbing to a purl 2 knit 1. So you just go straight from one stitch pattern into the next. And you will just complete that all the way around. Purl 2, knit 1. So it's just the opposite of the ribbing. Now the next row and every even row after this is a knit row. So you will knit every stitch around. So rows 1, 3, 5, and 7. All of the odd rows are all purl 2, knit 1, all the way around, and then when you reach your beginning marker, you will switch and do an all knit round, and then switch back to the purls and knit, and you will do that until your hat reaches 5 inches. One thing that you will need to do though is to get some stitch markers, and you will be placing those within the body of the hat to mark the sides, and we will use those markers later to show us where to begin on the decreases. I am going to use this style of stitch markers. However, if you have the locking stitch markers that are large enough to work around your needles, I suggest using them, because at one point you will have to take a stitch off of the needle and slip the marker and then put the stitch back on. If you don't want to have to deal with that, if you're using the locking needles, you can just clip them on and off, and you won't have to worry about accidentally knitting your marker into your hat. So if you have the locking stitch markers, go ahead and use that. If you don't, these will work. Just know that you're going to have to move a stitch off of the needle. It will be like this. You'll move it off, take the stitch marker off, and then you'll have to replace the stitch back on the needle. It's not that it's hard to do, but if you're uncomfortable in doing something like that, go ahead and use these locking stitch markers. Okay, so again, you will just continue in the purl 2, knit 1, and then a knit row until the body of your hat is about 5 inches. So we've worked the body portion of the hat to a point where it is now 5 inches long, and we are ready to start the crown shaping of the hat. All of the decreasing for the hat is done on these two sides. So let me show you. So you have this fun little arch here on the side, and it is flat across the top with an identical decrease here on the other side. So I will run through how to make all of the individual stitches in order to create this look of this decrease. I'm not going to work across entire rows because you already know how to do this. I'm just going to go through the individual stitches within the decrease. So the instructions are to work in pattern across to your side marker. So because we ended on a right side row, that means that this row is going to be the purl 2, knit 1. So I'm going to work those 15 stitches across to the side marker in that stitch pattern. So the purl 2, knit 1. Okay, so I have worked in pattern all the way to my first side marker. Now what you want to do is to slip your side marker and then purl 2 together. So you will take these 2 stitches and work them as if they were one. So bringing your yarn in front for a purl, you want to go under both stitches, purl them together, and now you can see you have taken 2 stitches down to 1. Let me undo that, and I will show you one more time. Let me get those back on my needle. Okay, we are ready to do it again. So we are going to take these 2 stitches and purl them as if they were one. So bringing your yarn in front, go under both stitches purlwise, purl them together, and you have decreased by 1 stitch. Okay, so from here what you want to do is continue to work in pattern to your next side marker, and you will do the same. You will slip that marker, work those next 2 purl stitches as a purl 2 together, decreasing by 1. Complete the row. Once you hit that beginning marker, it is another knit round, and then we will be ready to work row 3 of the crown. Now we are on row 3 of the crown, the decreasing portion, and we have worked in the established pattern, which is the purl 2, knit 1 across, and the instructions are to work in the established pattern until 1 stitch before the marker, before your side marker. So it looks like I've got 1 more to go, or 2 more to go. So we are going to purl these 2 stitches, and now I am 1 stitch before the side marker. So in the notions portion of the pattern, it tells you that you need 4 stitch markers. So now is when we are going to pick up that 4th. It tells us to place the new marker 1 stitch before the side marker. So we will do that. So the next decrease that we are going to work is a CDD, or a center double decrease. Now to do that, we slip 2 stitches together. So I'm going to carefully just pull that loop off and remove the marker. We'll set that aside and put that stitch back on the needle to be ready to work. So now you just slip them together as if to knit, and then we will knit that next stitch. The next step is to slip these stitches over the stitch that you just made. So we will grab them both at the same time and slip them right over that stitch. And you can see that it has taken all 3 of those stitches and made them one. So I'm going to take all of that out, and I will show you one more time. Get everything back on the needle. Okay, so what we will do is to slip the next 2 stitches knitwise as if they were one. You will knit the next stitch, and then you take the 2 stitches that you slipped off, and you are going to pass them over your new knit stitch, taking both stitches at the same time and pass them over that new stitch. And the 3 stitches are now one, and you can see that the stitch is straight up and down. It doesn't lean one direction or the other. That is the magic of the center double decrease. It is decreasing without leaning, and it returns the hat to pattern with these vertical stripes for the knit stitches. So from this point, you just work in pattern around until you reach your next side marker, and you will do the same thing. So within 1 stitch, you'll place a new marker, and then don't forget that you need to carefully slip that stitch off, remove this marker, putting the stitch back on your needle, and then you will make that center double decrease. If you do not remove your marker and you make your decrease, you will permanently knit your marker into your hat, so don't forget to slip that off. So after you have this decrease made, again, you just work in the pattern to your beginning marker, make another knit round, and then come back for row 5 for the next decrease. On row 5 of the crown decrease, I have worked in pattern across until we are 2 stitches before the first side marker. The pattern has us place the new marker and purl the next 2 stitches together. So we will purl those and then remove the old marker, knitting the next stitch. Whoops. And then purling the next 2 together. So on this round, we have decreased a stitch here and here. So again, you will just work in pattern around until you reach the second side marker. You'll add the new marker, purl 2 together, knit 1, purl 2 together, work around to the beginning of the row, complete a knit row, and then come back and we will work the decreases for row 7. We have worked row 7 of the crown decrease all the way up until we are 3 stitches before our first side marker. This is a very interesting row to work because we will be using several different methods for decreasing, and you will see in making them the ways that we are, it's going to keep within the stitch pattern. So the first decrease we need to make is that purl 2 together. Oh, before we do that, actually, we need to add our new marker. So 3 stitches before and add that new marker. Now purl 2 together. Then the next thing we are going to do is to slip a stitch, removing that old marker, and then you will knit the next stitch. Now taking that stitch that we slipped, you are going to pass it over, just like that. Then you will knit 1 and knit 2 together as if they were one. So you will just take the 2 stitches together and knit them. And now we purl 2 together. So again, work them as if they were 1 stitch. And you can see, so the purl 2 together is a purl stitch. By doing the knit 1 and then passing it over, it kept a knit stitch here on top. Then knit, and then knitting 2 together, it left a a knit stitch here on top. Then the purl 2 together, again, is that purl. So you can see by choosing different decreasing methods, we were able to stay within the stitch pattern of the hat. So again, you will just work in pattern across until you are the 3 stitches before your next side marker. Refer back to your pattern for all of those different decreases. And again, work to the front and make your next knit row and come back and we will do the decreases for row 9. Row 9 is once again worked until you are 3 stitches away from your side marker. We will add in our new stitch marker and then purl the next 2 stitches together and slip the next stitch, taking that old marker off, and we knit and pass the slip stitch over. Squeeze that off. The next decrease is again that center double decrease. So what we will do is to slip 2 stitches off as if to knit them together. Then you knit the next stitch and pass the 2 stitches over the knit stitch. So again, you can see how you're decreasing 2 and keeping that knit stitch on top, keeping it vertical. Then we will knit the next 2 stitches together. Purl 2 stitches together. And then again, just as before, you are going to work across in pattern until you are 3 stitches away from your marker, adding the new marker and following the pattern for all of the different decreases. And then for row 10, working another knit round, and we will do the decreases on row 11. At this point, we have worked most of the decreases on our hat, and the number of stitches on our needle is pretty small. It makes it a little more difficult in that you have to squish and move things around a little bit. It's feeling a little bit tight as you're working. But we are on row 11, and this is our last row of decreasing. So to me, it wasn't difficult enough to warrant switching everything over to DPNs because there is only one more row of decreasing. So I'm going to go ahead and leave mine on the circular needles, but if you want to switch to DPNs, absolutely go ahead and do that. So this is row 11, and I have worked it once again until there are 3 stitches before the stitch marker. And I'm going to scoot everything around. Lots of scooting on this row. We will add the new stitch marker So we are going to purl those next 2 stitches together, slip the stitch, removing the old stitch marker, knit and pass your slip stitch over, and the next decrease is again that center double decrease. No. We will slip the next 2 stitches knitwise at the same time, knitting the next stitch and passing the 2 slipped stitches over. Oops, I'll split that, go again. So getting under both loops there, and you will pass those slip stitches over. Knit 2 together. And purl 2 together. Like I said, lots of squishing the stitches around on this row. Okay, and so again you will work until you are 3 stitches before your marker. Go back to your pattern and work all of the decreases, and then continue in the row until you complete the row. And at that point we will transfer all of our stitches and close the top. So we have just completed row 11. There is not a final knit round, so there is no row 12. We have just completed all of the decreases that we are going to do on the hat, and we no longer need that beginning stitch marker, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that before it falls off. And now what we are going to do is to transfer our stitches from the cable needle onto the DPN needles. The position that we are going to transfer these stitches over is going to be a little bit different, but it'll make sense in the end, I promise. So you take your DPN and we are going to just slip all of the stitches over. Well, not all of, I'm sorry. We are going to move these 3 off and remove that stitch marker, and we will take the next 3 off, scooch around. And this, you can see, is that center double decrease of the last row that we did. So that is going to be the last stitch that we put on this needle. So we're going to go ahead and slip that off. So now I have 6 stitches on this DPN. And I'm going to flip it over, grab my next DPN, and we are again going to slip off these stitches. So we'll take the next 6 and remove the marker, and we will slip off the next 3. Pull this, that, 1, 2, 3, and so you can see again that the last stitch, let me scoot that so it doesn't fall off. This last stitch that we just moved is that center double decrease again, and so this leaves 3 stitches left on our cable needle. So what I'm going to do is pull it around to the other needle, and with the other side of our first DPN, I'm going to slip them over. So you can see that we have 9 stitches on each needle, and the tail is coming out of the 3rd stitch here. That's okay. The important thing is that we have the center double decrease as an edge of this needle, and the other center double decrease at the edge of the other needle. You can see that. So now what we are going to do is a variation of the Kitchener stitch. It's not a Kitchener exactly because we are not starting it exactly the way a Kitchener stitch is done, even though the seaming is going to be done the same. The first few stitches are not. So what we need to do is to give ourselves a length of yarn to do the sewing with across the top. So about 12 inches, a little more, whatever you're comfortable with. And just cut that off. So now we need to thread our tapestry needle. I can't find mine with a larger eye, so I'm just going to have to work that one in. There we go. Okay, and now we are ready to seam across the top of this hat. Now to make this seam, the first thing that we need to do is to get this yarn to the back. So we are just going to flip this over. So now we have the tail in the back. What we need to do is to get our yarn over to the edge. So we are just going to do that by working on the wrong side and just weaving that tail through so that it comes out at the same point of this first stitch on this back needle. So we are just going to weave that through. Okay, so now you can see we have moved the tail of our yarn and it is now coming out at the same place as our stitch on the needle. And we are ready to start sewing this up. Now, like I said, it's going to be just a variation of the Kitchener because it doesn't start exactly the same, but very similar. So what we are going to do is with our needle, you will insert it knitwise in the first stitch on the front needle. You'll pull that through, making sure that your yarn stays under the needles. Pull that through, and you will slip that stitch off. And moving that stitch from the needle onto the yarn tail. Now you will take your tapestry needle and go purlwise onto the front needle under that next stitch. Pulling the yarn through, but do not slip it off. Now we are going to switch to the back needles and you will purlwise under the first stitch, making sure to keep your yarn and your needle underneath, and pull your yarn through, and you will slip that stitch off of the needle and onto the tail. Tighten that up a little bit as you go. Then the next stitch is again on that back needle, and you will insert your tapestry needle knitwise, making sure that your yarn stays under the knitting needles. Now do not slip that stitch off. We are going to leave it on. So at this point, it's a repeat. You will work 2 stitches on the front needle and 2 stitches on the back. So with the front needles, it's a knit off, purl, and leave it on. With the back needle, it's a purl off and knit on. Oops. I always tighten mine after doing a set of 2 stitches. Now you don't want to tighten it too much just enough where you can see that it's about the same as the stitches from your knitting needles. So just to make sure it's not too loose, not too tight. So again, we are back to the front needle, and so it's knit off, purl, and leave it on. Always making sure that yarn stays underneath those needles. And to the back, it is a purl off. Whoops. There we go. So purl and slip it off, and knit on. Leaving that one on, snug it up a little bit, checking the tension here in the front, and we are back to the front needles, and it's a knit off, purl on, I'm going to tighten that up, fix the tension, and purl off, making sure it stays under the tip of that needle, slide it off, and knit on. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that all the way until I have one stitch left. Okay, so now we are down to one stitch on each needle. You will take the tapestry needle and knitwise into the last stitch on the front needle, and then purlwise into the last, leaving it on, and then purlwise into the last stitch on the back needle, and then you will just slip them both off. Taking that tail, so we just will tighten up that final stitch, and you have this nice flat seam across the top of your hat. All you need to do now is to weave in your end from seaming the hat, and then again from the ribbing, and then you have finished. So I hope you've enjoyed the walkthrough of making this Carten Beanie and learning this new cast on stitch and maybe a few new decrease methods. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button so everyone knows, and subscribe to the channel to be notified when we post new videos. We'll see you then.